Black Dahlia. Episode 7. Coroner's Inquest. Phoebe Mae Short arrived in Los Angeles on January 18. True to Jimmy Richardson's word, the examiner paid for her airfare. I suppose it was the least he could do after the cruel way he had reporter Wayne Sutton contact her. But we're talking Jimmy Richardson here. So, of course, the travel expenses also included the promise of an exclusive interview. Phoebe had barely stepped off the plane before Will Fowler swooped in for a quick interview before Phoebe could catch her connecting flight to see her daughter, Virginia, in Berkeley. Phoebe stated. And remember that some of Phoebe's quote came from the lies Beth had told her and from her memories of what Beth had said as a child. By now we know that Beth had no true ambitions to be an actress.
Betty always wanted to be an actress. She was ambitious and beautiful, and full of life, but she had her moments of despondency. She was gay and carefree one minute, then blue and in the depths of despair the next. She was a good girl. She wrote often, at least once a week. It was only 2 weeks ago that I received a letter from San Diego. I can't imagine who did this dreadful thing. I'm anxious to do anything to help in tracking down the fiend.
She also added.
I have suffered deeply. But the worst is yet to come.
The ever-generous Jimmy Richardson would also have Examiner reporters pick up Phoebe, Virginia, and her husband, Adrian, at the airport on the morning of January 22, 1947. It was the day of the coroner's inquest. Phoebe was due to testify. But first, she had to do a task that would prove her statement that the worst is yet to come was more a prophecy about to come true. She had to do what Cleo Short had refused to do, identify the body of their daughter, Elizabeth. Detective Harry Hansen escorted Phoebe and Virginia to the basement morgue of the coroner's office at the Hall of Justice. Once there, she told Detective Hansen,
I want to remember Elizabeth as she was.
But as she and Virginia waited behind the viewing glass, the poor mother had only moments to cherish the memories of her daughter's once lovely face before they would forever be turned to a nightmarish visage of torture and violence. A coroner's aide lifted the sheet. They stood in shock and silence. Finally Virginia was said to say,
I can't tell. Mama. I don't know.
Then Phoebe said,
It looks like my daughter. But I can't be sure.
Phoebe recalled that Beth had a distinctive mole on her left shoulder. The aide lowered the sheet, confirming the presence of the mole. With the identity of Elizabeth Short confirmed, Phoebe and Virginia prepared themselves for the inquest. Waiting for the inquest to begin, the Short family sat uncomfortably close to the Red Manley family as both Phoebe and Red waited to testify. Cops, reporters, and coroners added to the group waiting to testify or report on the details. The inquest began at 10:30 a.m.
Transcript of inquest. Held on the body of Elizabeth Short. At the Hall of Justice. Los Angeles, California. January 22, 1947. At 10:30 a.m.
Phoebe Mae Short, being duly sworn, testified as follows.
By the coroner, please state your name.
Phoebe Mae Short.
Where do you reside?
115 Salem Street, Medford, Massachusetts.
Have you viewed the body of a deceased person in the mortuary here?
I have.
Was that someone you knew in life?
It was.
What was her name?
Elizabeth Short.
Did she have a middle name?
No middle name.
Was she related to you?
My daughter.
Do you know her address?
The address was in San Diego at the time.
That is the last address you had for her?
That's right.
Do you recall what that was?
2750 Camino, Padera Drive, Pacific Beach.
Did she have an occupation as far as you knew?
As far as I know, she was a waitress.
Where was she born?
Hyde Park, Massachusetts.
What was her age?
22.
At the time of her death, was she single, married, widowed, or divorced?
Single.
And has never been married as far as you know?
As far as I know, she was not.
What is your information as to the date of her death?
I was notified January 15th.
That she died January 15th?
Yes.
Do you know where she died?
She was murdered here in Los Angeles.
Is it your information that her body was found on a street out here in some part of Los Angeles?
That's right.
Were you here at the time?
No, I was not.
You were in Massachusetts?
That's right.
How long since you last had seen your daughter?
In April 1946.
Where did you see her then?
At my own home in Massachusetts.
Did she remain with you for some time then? Was she living there, or just on a visit?
She had come home from Florida in February and left in April the same year.
While she was at home, did she tell you of any trouble or anyone that she feared, or had any trouble with anyone or any enemies?
No, she did not.
Or tell you of any love affairs?
Yes, she was in love with Gordon Fickling at that time.
Have you since corresponded with her?
I have.
And what address did you use for correspondence?
Well, that one in Hollywood and this last one in San Diego.
Do you have the address in Hollywood?
It is in my bag. That was the Chancellor apartment in Hollywood.
Did you have a later address in San Diego?
The one that I mentioned.
Has she corresponded or been in communication with any of your other relatives?
No, she just regularly wrote me once a week.
And those were the last addresses you had for her?
That's right.
Are you giving to the officers every assistance you can towards determining who the perpetrator of this crime was?
I am.
Jesse W. Haskins, being first duly sworn, testified as follows.
By the coroner, please state your name.
Jesse W. Haskins.
What is your occupation?
Detective Lieutenant, Police Department, Los Angeles, attached to University Detective Bureau.
Mr. Haskins, were you called to the scene of the finding of the body of the deceased person, Elizabeth Short, over whom we are holding the inquest?
I was.
When did you receive that call?
Approximately 11:05 the morning of the 15th of January.
And what time did you arrive at the scene?
At 11:18.
And where did you go in response to the call?
Went on Norton Street between Coliseum and 39th Street.
Where did you find the body of the victim in this case?
Found the body on the west side of Norton. From Coliseum to 39 on the property line is 1,200 feet. It's all vacant property. There is a fire plug in the center of that which would be 600 feet from Coliseum or 600 feet from 39 the other way. The body was 54 feet north of the fire plug toward Coliseum.
What is in that block, any houses or buildings?
The nearest houses face on Claiborne, and there is a back wall that comes up to the property line of Norton.
On the east side of Norton?
Yes, and they are clear across the property lines of the houses that face east on Norton.
How wide is Norton Street?
60 feet wide, and 120 feet east of the property line to the walls of the houses that face on Claiborne.
The body was found on the west side of Norton?
Yes, and from that point, it is 585 feet to Crenshaw, all vacant property.
Is that grown up with weeds?
Weeds and grass and rose clippings and such.
Tell the jury more definitely where you found the body, please.
The location of the body, and we arrived there, was, as I said, 54 feet north of this fire plug, which was directly in the center of the 1,200-foot space. The sidewalk is in on this street and the curbs in, and also the indentations for the driveway, are in and paved. The driveway measures 5 foot from the curb in the sidewalk. The sidewalk is 5 foot wide. The body was lying with the head towards the north, the feet towards the south, the left leg was 5 inches west of the sidewalk. The legs were spread out, and the body was severed in two. The body was lying face up, and the severed part was jogged over about 10 inches, the upper half of the body from the lower half.
Were there weeds at this location or grass?
Just grass at this location.
High enough to hide the body.
The body would not be hidden at all from the street on Norton. It could have been hidden from the other direction, Crenshaw, because there are some tall weeds between there and where the body was found.
Is this a sidewalk, or is it a much-traveled location?
It is possible there is great deal of travel on the street for cutting across to the two streets, otherwise there is no reason for anybody to walk across there.
Did the body appear to have been dead for some time?
From my observation, it looked fresh.
Would you say death had occurred after midnight of the 15th, or prior to midnight, or would you be able to form any opinion?
My opinion would be that it would be since midnight of the 15th.
Did you find any blood or tracks or anything of that nature at the scene?
Dropped line of words.
Body was found to the street. There was a tire track right up against the curbing, and there was what appeared to be a possible bloody heel mark in this tire mark, and on the curbing, which is very low there, was one spot of blood, and there was an empty paper cement sack lying in the driveway, and it also had a spot of blood on it.
Any other container or sack or cloth that the body might have been transported in?
There was not.
From your examination of the body, would you be able to form any opinion as to whether the crime had been committed at this scene or brought there from some other location?
It had been brought there from some other location.
Was there any clot of blood on the body, or did it appear to have been washed?
The body was clean and appeared to have been washed.
Do you know who reported the finding of the body?
All I know is how our communication division was notified of it, and we were unable to locate the party. It was a woman's voice which called the communication division at approximately 10 minutes before we received the call from them. And their statement at this time was that there was a nude body on the west side of Norton about halfway from Coliseum to 39th, and the flies were bothering it, and it needed attention, and the call necessarily was put over the air as a 390 down.
Is there anything else you can tell the jury with regard to the facts surrounding the finding of the body or what you found at the location?
No, I don't recall of anything else that would help the jury.
Do you have the name of any witnesses who have been
Line dropped.
Sentley?
I do not. Only from investigation of other officers.
Did you have the name of one, Robert Manley?
I have.
Is he here this morning?
He is.
I'll call him later. That's all then. Thank you.
Robert Manley, being first duly sworn, testified as follows.
By the coroner. Please state your name.
Robert Manley,
Where do you live?
8010 Mountain View.
Your occupation?
Salesman.
That is Mountain View in Southgate?
That's right, sir.
Were you acquainted with the deceased in this case, Elizabeth Short?
Yes, sir.
How long had you known her? Approximately how long?
Approximately a month.
When did you see her, meet her the last time?
I saw Miss Short January 9th, which was the last time.
Where was that?
I left Miss Short at the Biltmore Hotel at 6:30 p.m., January 9th, 1947.
Where had you picked her up from?
I had driven her to Los Angeles from San Diego.
Had you met her in San Diego and brought her to Los Angeles?
Yes, sir.
Had she asked you to bring her to Los Angeles?
Yes.
Did she say why she wanted to come to Los Angeles?
She said she didn't like San Diego.
Did she say what she was going to do when she got here or where she was going?
She said she was going to meet her sister in Los Angeles and was going to spend a couple of days up in Berkeley with her sister, and then go to Boston, which was her home.
And you left her at the Biltmore Hotel?
That's correct.
Did she give you any address where she was expected to stay here?
No, sir.
And that was the last time you saw her?
That was the last time.
And that was January 9th?
Yes, sir.
At what time?
6:30.
And you haven't seen or heard from her since?
No, sir.
Is there anything else you can tell the jury for the benefit of the officers that might aid in determining the perpetrator of this crime?
No, sir.
You have given them every assistance you can, have you?
Yes, sir.
H.L. Hansen, being duly sworn, testified as follows.
By the coroner, please state your name.
H.L. Hansen.
And your occupation?
Police officer, City of Los Angeles, attached to the Homicide Division.
Mr. Hansen, have you made a follow-up investigation of the deceased, Elizabeth Short?
Yes, we have.
Have you been able to determine as to any possible identification of the death of the person who may have committed this crime?
As to now, we have no definite information as to who perpetrated it.
And you are following all clues you receive?
Every effort to locate the criminal is being made.
Is there anything else that you can say that might assist the jury in arriving at a verdict?
I think it has been pretty well covered.
Frederick D. Newbarr, being first duly sworn, testified as follows.
By the coroner, please state your name.
Frederick D. Newbarr.
What is your occupation?
Physician and surgeon.
And you are the autopsy surgeon for the coroner?
Yes, sir, Chief Autopsy Surgeon, Los Angeles County.
Did you perform an autopsy on the body of Elizabeth Short, over whom we are holding the present inquest?
Yes, sir.
When did you perform the autopsy?
January 16, 1947 at 10:30 a.m.
From your examination of the body, would you be able to form any opinion as to the date of death, as to whether it was on the 15th or prior to the 15th?
It was my opinion that the appearance of the body was such that the death occurred not more than 24 hours previous to the 15th, probably less.
So that the death would have occurred either on the 14th or 15th?
Yes, sir.
Will you please state to the jury, either briefly or in full, as you like, the result of your autopsy findings, please?
The immediate cause of the death was hemorrhage and shock due to concussion of the brain and lacerations of the face. The body is that of a female about 15 to 20 years of age, measuring 5 feet 5 inches in height, and weighing 115 pounds. There are multiple lacerations in the mid-forehead, in the right forehead, and at the top of the head in the midline. There are multiple tiny abrasions, linear in shape, on the right face and forehead. There are 2 small lacerations 1/4 inch each in length, on each side of the nose near the bridge. There is a deep laceration in the face 3 inches long, which extends laterally from the right corner of the mouth. The surrounding tissues are ecchymotic and bluish-purple in color. There is a deep laceration 2.5 inches long extending laterally from the left corner of the mouth. The surrounding tissues are bluish-purple in color. There are 5 linear lacerations in the right upper lip, which extend into the soft tissues for a distance of 1/8 inch. The teeth are in a state of advanced decay. The 2 upper central incisors are loose, and 1 lower incisor is loose. The rest of the teeth.
Words illegible.
Areas of subarachnoid hemorrhage on the right side, and small hemorrhagic areas in the corpus callosum. No fracture of the skull is visible. There is a depressed ridge on both sides and in the anterior portion of the neck. It is light brown in color. There is an abrasion irregular in outline in the skin of the neck in the anterior midline. There are 2 linear abrasions in the left anterior neck. It is light brown in color. There are 2 depressed ridges in the posterior neck, pale brown in color. The lower ridge has an abrasion in the skin at each extremity. The pharynx and larynx are intact. There is no evidence of trauma to the hyoid bone, thyroid, or cricoid cartilages, or tracheal rings. There is a small area of ecchymosis in the soft tissues of the right neck at the level of the upper tracheal rings. There is no obstruction in the laryngotracheal passage. There is an irregular laceration with superficial loss in the skin of the right breast. The tissue loss is more or less square in outline and measures 3 1/4 inches transversely and 2 1/2 inches longitudinally. Extending toward the midline from this irregular laceration are several superficial lacerations in the skin. There is an elliptical opening in the skin located 3/4 inch to the left of the left nipple. The opening measures 2 3/4 inches in a transverse direction and 1 1/4 in a longitudinal direction in its mid-portion. The margins of these wounds show no appreciable discoloration.
Doctor, I don't believe it will be necessary for you to read all this. It is rather long, and I don't think we need to read all of it here. The essential findings with regard to cause of death have already been expressed, and that is the concussion of the brain and the lacerations of the face. The portion of your findings with regard to the chest, would you read that on the second page there, the organs of the chest, were they in normal?
2 lines dropped.
Left lung is pink in color and well aerated. The right lung is somewhat adherent due to fairly firm pleural adhesions. The lung is pink in color and well aerated. There is calcified thickening of the 9th rib on the right side and the scapular line. The heart shows no gross pathology.
Then the next paragraph with regard to the severing of the body.
The trunk is completely severed by an incision which is almost straight through the abdomen, severing the intestine at the duodenum and through the soft tissues of the abdomen, passing through the intervertebral disc between the 2nd and 3rd lumbar vertebra. There is very little ecchymosis along the tract of the incision. There is a gaping laceration 4 1/2 inches, which extends longitudinally from the umbilicus to the suprapubic area. On both sides of this laceration there are multiple superficial lacerations. There are multiple crisscross lacerations in the suprapubic area which extend through the skin and soft tissues. No ecchymosis is seen.
Was there evidence of sexual assault? You might read the last paragraph, and I believe that covers it, on the next page.
The stomach was filled with greenish-brown granular material, mostly feces and other particles which could not be identified. All smears for spermatozoa are negative.
Is there anything else which would contribute to the medical cause of death?
No, sir, I don't think so.
Your finding is that the real cause of death was hemorrhage and shock due to blows to the head?
Blows on the head and face.
Verdict of Coroner's Jury State of California, County of Los Angeles in the matter of the inquisition upon the body of Elizabeth Short, deceased. Before Ben H. Brown, coroner. We, the jurors, summoned to appear before the coroner of Los Angeles County at Room 102, Hall of Justice, Los Angeles County, California, on the 22nd day of January A.D., 1947, to inquire into the cause of the death of Elizabeth Short, having been duly sworn according to law, and having made such inquisition and hearing the testimony adduced, upon our oaths, each and all do say that we find that the deceased was named Elizabeth Short, a female, single, native of Massachusetts, aged about 22 years, and that she came to her death found on the 15th day of January, 1947 at Norton Street between 39th and Coliseum Drive, Los Angeles County, California, and that this death was caused by hemorrhage and shock due to concussion of the brain and lacerations of the face. And from the testimony introduced, we find said injuries to have been inflicted on the deceased by some person or persons unknown at this time to this jury, and at some location unknown to this jury. And we find this to be a homicide and recommend that every effort be made to apprehend the perpetrator or perpetrators responsible therefor, all of which we duly certify by this inquisition in writing, by us signed this 22nd day of January, 1947. Choteau W. Paul, Foreman, Paul I. Todd, Robert Kessler, H. W. La, Chat, S. R. Moore, R. W. Rose, Fred Weller, H. E. Breyer, F. D. Tucker.
One important fact that should be addressed here is the presence of feces in Beth's stomach.
The stomach was filled with greenish-brown granular material, mostly feces and other particles which could not be identified.
The presence of feces in Beth's stomach is one of the most contentious and divisive elements of the Black Dahlia case. Some suggest that Beth was forced to eat feces. Others, such as researcher Larry Harnisch, claim that the feces was there as part of the digestion process. Quoted from Harnisch's website. Fact: the fecal material found in her stomach was from the natural digestion of food and a result of her being cut in half, according to doctors and investigators I have interviewed. Harnisch usually does a good job of debunking many myths surrounding the Black Dahlia case, but I can think of no way that feces in the stomach would be part of natural digestion. Actual feces are not formed until food has traveled through the digestive system. As it digests, required nutrients are absorbed through the intestinal walls. Waste does not become what would typically be called feces until it is well into the large intestine after the nutrients have been removed and as more and more water is removed from the waste until it solidifies into fecal matter called stool, which collects in the rectum, and is finally passed through the anus. Although it is possible to have feculent material in the stomach, it is usually present due to severe illness, including intestinal blockage caused by 1. Impacted feces. 2. Postoperative adhesions. Scar tissue that develops after surgery and forms fibrous connective bands connecting tissues and organs that would not normally be connected. 3. Neoplasms. An abnormal tissue growth forming from cells growing and dividing faster than normal or living longer than they should. Neoplasms could be cancerous or not cancerous. 4. Hernias. 5. Inflammatory bowel disease or inflammation of the intestine. 6. Intussusception. A telescoping of the intestine where part of the intestine slides into another part of the intestine. 7. Volvulus. A twisting of the intestine. 8. Gastrocolic or duodenocolic fistulas could also account for feces in the stomach. If Beth was so ill that she had feces in her stomach, she would have been or soon would be experiencing feculent vomiting. There are links to videos and websites below that will go into more detail. But suffice it to say these are conditions either requiring immediate medical attention or would have caused Beth problems during her life. Dr. Newbarr specifically stated at the inquest.
The trunk is completely severed by an incision which is almost straight through the abdomen, severing the intestine at the duodenum and through the soft tissues of the abdomen passing through the intervertebral disc between the second and third lumbar vertebra. Severing the intestine at the duodenum.
Dr. Newbarr makes no mention of the large intestine being severed. And even if the large intestine was severed, thus allowing feces into the abdominal cavity, I still don't see how feces could have gotten inside the stomach. The autopsy should have shown any of the severe medical conditions previously mentioned. And such conditions would have been important enough to show Beth's health at the time of her murder, they would have been mentioned at the inquest. So I am inclined to side with those who think Beth was forced to eat feces. If there are doctors or others specializing in the digestive system who can shed more light on this topic, please comment below. If the question has already been easily answered by experts interviewed by Larry Harnisch, as he says, then there should be medical experts out there who can definitively answer this once and for all. Another thing I will add, is that after studying the pictures of the abdominal cavity and comparing them to the inquest testimony, it does prove that only an experienced surgeon could have done this. A point that some may still deny or overlook. The body was severed in the perfect place, between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. Much has been made of the location of the severing of the spinal column, and with good reason. But we must also take into consideration the amount of and placement of the organs. The killer must have known how to get around the different organs to cause as little damage as possible. A novice couldn't have worked their way through so much material with a sharp instrument without slicing everything to shreds. The killer knew to cut through the duodenum, the connecting part of the small intestine to the stomach, the perfect place to do as little damage as possible to the other organs. Another bone of divisive contention between theorists studying the Black Dahlia case is what is the unidentified greenish-brown granular material described as other particles. To quote directly from the inquest.
The stomach was filled with greenish-brown granular material, mostly feces and other particles which could not be identified.
So what were the granular particles, which could not be identified? Some researchers speculate that Beth was force-fed feces. Some, like Black Dahlia researcher Steve Hodel, suggest she was fed fertilizer. That would account for the fecal matter as well, possibly accounting for the granular material, as being granulized fertilizer, which could have been added to manure fertilizer. I'll put links below that will go into more details on Hodel's website. On FAQ 76, he has pictures that he thinks are of Bandini steer manure fertilizer or Bandini fertilite found at the body dump site. I cannot comment on the composition of Bandini fertilizers of 1947. But modern Bandini fertilizer does appear to have green and brown bits according to these pictures taken from a YouTube video. This modern Bandini is called Bandini Pro Choice 21714. Although this fertilizer is mostly white, the darker granules would be good candidates for the material found in Beth's stomach, especially if they were mixed with manure fertilizer. I have no idea how this compares to 1947 variants of Bandini fertilizer. But I did find an old Bandini gardening manual on eBay from the 1950s, and fertilite was no longer listed as a product. The manual has no pictures of the fertilizers, but there is a description of their steer fertilizer, described as.
For general gardening needs, Bandini steer manure, with its high organic content and well-rotted, weed-free particles, provides an excellent humus as well as soil conditioner.
And
all Bandini registered balanced plant foods contain not only chemical elements, but, most important for Western soils, organic elements also.
Although fertilite is no longer listed as a product, there is a product called Bandini Organic Garden Mulch, created from ground alfalfa stems. Remember, the stomach was filled with greenish-brown granular material. Fertilizer made from alfalfa would be a good candidate for the granular material found in Beth's stomach. It would be no wild stretch of the imagination to compare these photos of fertilizer pellets with the description of the contents of Beth's stomach. And it is also interesting to note that some of these alfalfa pellets are used as livestock feed. Could the killer have viewed Beth as nothing more than livestock? Perhaps something akin to an animal used for scientific study like a lab rat or monkey for medical testing. After all, Dr. Deriver said the killer had a superabundance of curiosity. And may even be a studious type. And was the experimenter and analyst in the most brutal forms of torture. And he also said the killer delighted in feeling himself into the humiliation of his victim. There are few better ways of humiliation than to make someone literally eat shit. Say what you want about Dr. Deriver, and we will in a future episode, but I think he was onto something when profiling the Black Dahlia murderer. Too bad he probably focused on the wrong man. Also interesting to note is that alfalfa fertilizer is often recommended for roses. Beth had a tattoo of a rose on her leg. Normally it would be a stretch to put those two facts together, but in this case, the murderer went out of his or her way to cut out the area of her leg with the rose tattoo and insert it into Beth's vagina. Something else to ponder is the statement by Detective Jesse W. Haskins about the body dump site. That it was filled with
weeds and grass and rose clippings and such.
Someone, probably more than one person in the neighborhood, liked to grow roses. Could Beth's killer have liked growing roses? When the killer was done with his or her work, could he or she have dumped these human rose clippings where he or she usually dumped their garden waste? Was the dumping ground an area of meaning to the murderer, or just a well-known convenient place to dump his clippings? Note, although I reference research done by Steve Hodel, and I do recognize George Hodel as a suspect, but I do not necessarily see him as being the murderer. We will look much closer into the Hodel theory in another episode. And although I question Larry Harnisch's statement about his views on the feces, it does not mean I discredit his theories as to the killer's identity. The Harnisch theory is another one that we will look at much closer in a future episode. In future episodes we will look into suspects with ties to the area, as well as other possibilities and angles. Notice that more often I am referring to the killer as he or she. Most of the prime suspects are men, but one of my personal prime suspects is someone with stakes in the area who was a woman. A woman connected with a better-known male prime suspect, with the area in contention being literally across the street from where Beth's body was dumped. But we'll get to them in a future episode, along with other suspects. But although I do have my personal prime suspects and persons of interest who are discussed less frequently than the well-known suspects, and will from time to time inject my opinions into things, I do not have any intentions of telling others what to think or believe. I wish to present as much of the evidence and theories as possible to allow you, the viewer, to come to your own conclusions. I also encourage you to give your personal theories in the comments. The more people who compare notes and communicate, the better the chances that truth can rise to the surface. And we really are just getting started. Next time, we will continue studying the investigation and focus on the Avenger messages sent to the press.